So thinking back on the math lesson where you tried to pull kids together and have some more normal instruction, what stands out for you in your mind from that lesson?
Something that I really liked is that I was able to incorporate, since it's the first lesson of the day, their bell ringer that they did. And so I was able to use that beginning time when they're transitioning and eating breakfast and everything else to be able to kind of like prime their minds for what they're going to be talking about. Just so, I mean, it was more base level, more foundational, that they were able to have that in mind before the lesson started. And so I thought that was really beneficial.
Yeah, that was exactly the word that came to my mind, that it primed them for it. They were ready to think about fractions and do a little bit more with it because they've been doing a little bit of work beforehand with it. So you started out in a really interesting way, though. Talk about how you got your idea for deciding to start that way and kind of why you decided to start the lesson.
So the way I decided to start the lesson was to hook them on the why. Because, I mean, for 5th grade, we've been doing fractions for so long at this point, and especially recently I had a student, and I know Amy, I had a student, we were doing one of our math lessons recently because it's near the end of the school year, and he said, he's like, why are we still learning? We've already taken our state testing. I don't know why we're still doing this. And he wasn't being hateful or disrespectful, but he was genuinely confused. He's like, we've done the learning for the test. What else is needed? And just that kind of checking out, because we're so close to the end of the school year. And so for my lesson, I was like, I want them to feel like this is actually relevant to their lives. That it's not just something I'm like, well, you'll need this in the next grade. Well, you won't test well if you don't know it. And so I really liked being able to say, you know what, we're starting with something that isn't even math. And they were surprised at that. And originally I had thought I would brainstorm a list and just talk about it with them, but then I thought it would just be so much more engaging and everything else if the students got to add. And I really enjoyed them being able to talk about like construction and building and baking and cooking, and then once one thing, they were able to build off of each other. And I loved that a math lesson was able to be started in that way.
Yeah, you know how in the past we've kind of talked about getting discussions going where it wasn't you a student, you a student, and it was just so authentic the way that discussion developed, with you asking how do you use fractions in your life, and just one after the other they were popcorning these ideas off of each other instead of it having to come back to you to prompt. So it was really cool to see that really authentic discussion build off of it. That makes me think about one of the kids said in middle school science. Do you remember hearing that comment, that they would use it in middle school science? So I thought that comment was especially interesting because it wasn't about the long-term future. It was about next year, and something they've been thinking a lot about, you know, this transition to middle school. So that seemed like a really important, authentic connection for that kid.
It was a point of excitement for them, being able to use this, and they love science, and so the idea of learning something right now that they'll get to use in middle school, which seems so big and awesome for them, I definitely think that was an authentic connection.
Yeah. Was that something that you anticipated they would do, is make that middle school connection?
No, honestly, I had originally said, outside of the school setting, but I think so many of them are so excited to transition to middle school that they were like, but we can use this next year.
Yeah.
And so that was really cool.
Yeah, one thing that I was thinking about is some of the things on the list are pretty long-term, like you were taught. They mentioned construction and some career type moves, which for a 5th grader is maybe not quite as relevant because it's so far away in their minds anyway. And so to have them come up with something that was more close at home, I think was a good thing. So I was just wondering, do you think there were any others on the list that were kind of current for them?
I know that many of them are having kind of gradual release as far as it goes to what they get to do at home. And so even just getting to talk about like the cooking or anything else, because I know a lot of them, you know, they talk about their parents who are awesome cooks or they're great at baking. And I know that they get excitement and the idea of being able to do those things on their own. And so even just the cooking and baking, I feel like that's something that I've even in personal conversations known that that's something they have interest in.
Nice.
And so that's something that, you know, the older they get, the more they will do on their own.
Yeah.
So
Yeah.
increasing in relevance.
Right. So I like that you brought up that idea of relevance, because I feel like those current and near future connections that they made were the ones that got them the most excited. And you mentioned the enthusiasm when they brought up the 5th grade one. So I think that's really something to keep in mind as you plan for, you know, future lessons, future teaching, is just what's the connection to their now or their near now, because that's going to make it feel the most relevant. And I loved the starting with the why, and you know, so when you start with the why and the why has some currency for them, I think that really makes it engaging. So that hook and the fact that it kind of just rolled right off of the bell ringer stuff, those were obviously some really strong aspects of the lesson. Anything else that kind of stands out to you as you think back on the lesson?
I love just, and I can't think of the wording that was used, but whenever students come to maybe the conclusion that you might have had in your head on their own, like whenever you're not looking for that wording, but then they use this wording where you have to just stop for a second and really acknowledge it, because like I don't even remember what we were addressing concerning fractions, but they were just observing, you know, ordering them from least to greatest. And I remember one of them, the very first thing, he's like, well, if the numerator is the same as the denominator, well, that's a whole. And so we know if the numerator is greater. And it was just like, yes, that was so exciting to see, as especially for this student. They've struggled in math before, and using that vocabulary like he did, I thought that was really awesome.
Yeah, that's the thing that stood out for me too, is the academic vocabulary use, that they were really tuned into that.